Hey, and welcome to Synaptic Soul, the podcast where science meets spirit, and we get real about the beautiful and brutal and magical mess of being human. I'm your host, Ava Marie Anderson, writer, mystic, multidimensional mischief maker. Quick disclaimer, you may hear the occasional snort, sigh, dramatic flop from my two French bulldogs, Rocky and Rambo. They're the soundtracks of my life, my soul companions, and honestly, the real stars of the show. Someday we'll dedicate a full episode to their role in my daily rituals, emotional healing, and wild spiritual life. But for now, just know that they're always close by, snoring their support. Let's dive in. There are moments in life that don't just bend us. They break us wide open. And not with grace and not with elegance, but with the messiness of a demolition. But it's in that mess that the sacred work begins. In 2021, my life collapsed, and not for the first time, but in a way that felt like a final sacred unraveling. I quit my corporate job and walked straight into the unknown, choosing to work full-time for the Sage app. I was bringing home just $2,500 a month, and let's be real, $2,500 a month in San Diego doesn't stretch very far. But I trusted something bigger. And I trusted the pulse of my soul more than the stability of a paycheck. 6 months after that, I finally reached my threshold of a toxic relationship with my ex-husband, and I asked him to leave. Another 6 months after that, I was living alone for the very first time in my life. My kids had grown and gone, my finances were shaky, and to top it all off, my body was screaming, literally. Over the prior year, I'd been diagnosed with a series of autoimmune issues, flares that deep down I knew had nothing to do with just biology. They were the consequence of years of holding in a scream, of shrinking, of making myself small to survive. And my body had finally had enough. And it wasn't just my relationship or career that were collapsing, my cells were too. I was unraveling from the inside out. And yet something wild happened. In that unraveling, I surrendered. I stopped gripping. I followed my intuition even when it terrified me. And through the rubble, I found something that I hadn't felt in years. And that was clarity. The kind that doesn't arrive with applause, but with a quiet knowing. Because everything had changed. The growth, the happiness, the alignment I live with now, none of it came from what I achieved. It came from what I allowed to die. Because sometimes life isn't asking you to manifest more. It's asking you to make space and to clear the field and to let the sacred disruption do what it came to do, which is recode you. There is something deeply humbling about hitting a wall that you didn't see coming. Or worse, one that you did see, but you couldn't avoid. It's the kind of wall that doesn't just slow you down, but shatters your momentum and your plans and your sense of identity. This is what I call a sacred collapse. It's not just a breakdown, but a breaking open. And here's the thing. Collapse has a pattern. It's not random, even if it feels like it. It's actually a deeply intelligent response from the psyche and the body and the soul when old systems no longer serve us, but the new ones haven't arrived yet. It's the quantum gap between what was and what could be. Biologically, when our nervous system perceives threat, whether real or energetic, it activates one of the four main responses: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And these responses aren't just emotional reactions. They're biochemical cascades. Hormones like cortisol and adrenaline flood the system. The vagus nerve signals emergency, and all non-essential functions shut down, including digestion and long-term thinking, and even sometimes our sense of hope. In a freeze response, which is often what happens in a spiritual collapse, the body goes into conservation mode. You might feel paralyzed or disassociated or like you're watching your life from the outside. You stop being able to do, and instead you just are. You're raw, exposed, and waiting. And that's not weakness. It's your nervous system trying to protect you from further harm by putting you in stasis. It's a form of spiritual hibernation. And here's where it gets cosmic. Because while this biological freeze is happening on a physical level, something else is happening on a metaphysical level. Your ego, the version of you that you built for survival, is cracking. The scaffolding of who you thought you had to be begins to collapse under its own weight. And it's not failure. This is invitation. It's the invitation to stop striving and start listening, to stop performing and start feeling, to stop pretending and start becoming. From a soul level, collapse is often a signal that we've outgrown reality. We have worn a mask for too long and stayed in a pattern for too many lifetimes, and now the universe is no longer asking us to change, but forcing us to. And this is where I want to challenge the idea that collapse is something to avoid. Because what if the fall is the first step of your flight? What if everything that is falling apart is actually falling into place, but just in a new configuration? And in that pause, in that terrifying stillness of, I don't even know who I am anymore, something miraculous is happening. It's a rewiring. And it's quiet, it's subtle, but your brain and your body and your soul, they're starting to build a new blueprint. And it's one that's not based on survival, but on truth. And that's why a collapse always precedes expansion. It's the clearing of psychic debris. It's the stripping of old code and the burning of false altars. And it's grief, yeah, but it's also rebirth. Because we're not machines, we're ecosystems. And ecosystems don't upgrade, they regenerate, but only after the wildfire. Here's the thing that nobody tells you in the middle of a breakdown. Science is on your side. So let's just start with the brain. When everything falls apart and when you feel like you can't think straight or remember your purpose or even string a coherent sentence together, it's not because you're weak. It's because your brain is actually entering a rewiring phase, a neuroplastic one. Neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to adapt and change across your entire lifespan. So when you experience trauma or loss, your neurons, those tiny little messengers, begin to look for new ways to connect. Old pathways that were associated with your previous identity and habits and beliefs may atrophy. New ones, though, begin to spark. But that repatterning process isn't seamless. It's messy. Think of it as a spiritual construction work happening at a cellular level. There's dust, there's noise, but it's all leading somewhere. In fact, trauma often acts as the catalyst for this rewiring. There's a term in psychology for what happens after major breakdowns, and it's called post-traumatic growth. Research has shown that after experiencing a life-altering event, be it grief or illness or divorce or collapse, many people report greater clarity and deeper purpose and enhanced spirituality and stronger relationships. But the growth doesn't come despite the breakdown. It comes because of it. And this is echoed in chaos theory. Systems, including human systems, don't change gradually. They hold their pattern until they reach a critical threshold, a tipping point. And then seemingly overnight, they collapse. Only to reemerge, though, with a new, higher order. And it's not regression. It's evolution through disorder. Life doesn't shift incrementally. It leaps through chaos. And it's also mirrored in quantum physics in what's called decoherence. When a quantum system collapses from a state of infinite probabilities into a single observable outcome, it looks like a breakdown. But really, it's the choice point. It's the moment when the wave becomes the particle, when potential becomes form. And your soul works the same way. When you're in collapse, what's really happening is the collapse of old timelines, old quantum versions of you that no longer resonate with who you are becoming. And it feels like devastation, but it's really selection. And creation. Collapse is the universe whispering, choose again. Even your cells reflect this sacred cycle. During intense stress or emotional upheaval, your mitochondria, those energy centers of your cells, can go into a sort of protective mode. Your immune system, if already taxed, might flare. But when given the right support, like rest and nourishment and release, those same cells begin to regenerate. There's a biological basis for the idea that breakdowns become breakthroughs. And so if you're in it right now, if your life feels like a mosaic scattered across the floor, know this. The chaos isn't the end. It's the inflection point. It's the chrysalis, not the coffin. You're not broken. You're being reassembled at a higher frequency. And if that doesn't sound like science, it's only because we haven't learned to recognize transformation while it's still mid-metamorphosis. This episode is brought to you in part by one of my most favorite humans on this spinning planet, Morgan Garza, and her book Soul Magic. If you've ever felt like your power was just waiting beneath the surface, or like there's something ancient and electric inside of you ready to be reclaimed, then this is the book that helps you remember. Soul Magic is not just a read, it is a summoning. It's filled with rituals and stories and the kind of grounded spiritual wisdom that doesn't talk at you, it talks with you. Morgan writes like a soul sister, a cosmic cheerleader, and a priestess all rolled into one. And it's a must-have for anyone on the path of awakening, reclaiming. So grab your copy at morgangarza.com or wherever books are sold, or bless someone else's journey and gift it, because real magic's meant to be shared. That's Soul Magic by Morgan Garza. You'll feel it in your bones. If we zoom out beyond the science for a moment, so beyond the data, beyond the nervous system and the neuroplasticity, what we find is that collapse has always been sacred. It's across cultures and across timelines. Collapse has been honored as the threshold between one life and another, one self and another, one dimension of being and the next. In mythology, destruction isn't a curse. It's a goddess. In Hindu cosmology, there's Kali, the fierce, wild-mouthed goddess with a necklace of skulls standing atop a slain ego. And she's not gentle. She's not here to comfort you. She's here to liberate you, to sever illusions with her blade and to consume what no longer serves, and to remind you that death is not the opposite of life. It's the requirement for rebirth. Kali doesn't destroy what's true. She only destroys what's false. And then there's Sekhmet, the lion-headed Egyptian goddess of war and healing. She's fire and blood and medicine all wrapped up in one. So when humanity lost its way, it was Sekhmet who unleashed, not to punish, but to purge. She reminds us that rage and grief and devastation are not negative emotions. They're catalysts. They burn through the density. They cleanse and they prepare the land for something new. Even Hecate, goddess of the crossroads and the underworld in Greek mythology, presides over the liminal, the in-between, the void. She stands at the gates between worlds, between endings and beginnings, holding the torch not to blind you, but to help you see in the dark. These goddesses teach us what the culture often forgets. Sometimes your breakdown is your initiation. And that devastation isn't always punishment. It's preparation. So when your relationship ends, or when the job crumbles, or when the identity that you have spent years building dissolves into smoke, it's not failure. It's an initiation into truth. And it's violent only because we hold on to it so tightly. Ego death doesn't feel poetic when it's happening. It feels like panic, like breathlessness, like you're watching everything slip through your fingers and there is nothing left to hold on to. Because there isn't. The scaffolding of who you thought you had to be is being dismantled, and the persona that once protected you no longer fits. And that's the thing about expansion. It makes your old shell feel suffocating. In alchemy, there's a stage called calcination, and it's the first step in turning lead into gold. And what is calcination? It's the burning away of all that's impure, all that's dense. It's fire applied to the base material of self so that the soul can emerge. Your collapse is calcination. It's the holy fire. You're not being punished, you're being purified. So many people pray for transformation without realizing what it requires. We ask the universe to help us rise, but we forget that rising often demands a fall. We ask for new timelines without considering that the old ones must collapse. We want rebirth, but we avoid death. But death, symbolic, spiritual, and egoic, isn't the end. It's the portal. What if the worst thing that ever happened to you was also the best thing that ever happened for you? Not because it didn't hurt, but because it woke you up, because it peeled you open, because it stripped away everything that wasn't real and showed you what actually is. And I know, that sounds romantic, but when you're in it, it's anything but. It's nausea and grief and brain fog. It's crying on the floor at 3 a.m. It's doubting everything. And it's wondering if maybe you made a huge mistake and the life you left behind wasn't so bad after all. But you didn't believe it because it was bad. You left it because it was too small. And that's the cost of becoming. And that's why destruction is sacred. Once the fire has passed through, once the job is gone and the relationship is done and the illusion is burned to the ground, what comes next is the most uncomfortable phase of all. And that's the space between. The after, but the not yet. The liminal void. And this is where many people panic. Because when you've lived your entire life through structure and roles and titles and plans and identities, the absence of structure feels like death. But here's the cosmic plot twist. It's not death, it's gestation. You're not lost, you're in between versions. You've exited the old self, but the new one hasn't finished forming yet. And that in-between state, that's where the rewiring happens. But let's talk about what's happening inside your body right now. When everything falls apart, your nervous system interprets the loss as danger, and that's not irrational. It's ancient wiring. The amygdala in your brain, your fear center, lights up. Your vagus nerve gets activated. You might experience racing thoughts and digestive issues and inflammation and insomnia or that familiar heaviness in your chest. But this is not the time to override your body. This is the time to listen. Emotional integration starts with permission. Permission to feel what you feel without trying to fix it. Grief isn't a problem. Sadness isn't brokenness. And fear isn't failure. They're messengers. The body's a sacred archive, and when you're in a state of collapse, the nervous system is actually inviting you into deeper truth. And this is why modalities like somatic experiencing, breathwork, trauma-informed movement, and even just gentle nervous system regulation practices are so powerful during a sacred disruption. They bring you back into relationship with yourself, not just mentally, but physically and energetically and emotionally. And once your body begins to feel safe again, even just a little, the brain can begin to rewire. New meaning starts to form. New beliefs begin to take root. And this time, those beliefs aren't just layered over trauma. They're born from awareness. Instead of saying, I have to work myself to death to survive, it becomes, I get to honor my energy and be supported. Instead of, I always choose the wrong people, it becomes, I'm learning to choose from self-love and not from survival. And this is how you begin to build the new self. And it's not all at once, but in tiny, sacred, micro moments of awareness. Your new identity doesn't come from a 30-day plan. It comes from integrating your pain, that all that pain that you tried to escape, from giving voice to the scream that you held in, from letting your own hands gather the ashes of what was, and then form it all into something new. Not despite your collapse, but because of it. And here's the alchemical truth: the void isn't empty, it's a womb. What looks like nothingness is actually potential. What feels like darkness is often incubation. When you're no longer who you were, but yet not who you're becoming, you're in a sacred space. And this is when the most powerful rewiring happens, and it's because you're not rushing to become. You're just allowing yourself to emerge. And that emergence comes with its own pace and its own rhythm. It's not dictated by fear, it's not driven by validation, but it's guided by your body and your truth and your soul. You don't need to rebuild your old life. You're building something that you have never seen before, something wild and something real and something free. So, if you're in the wreckage, hear me. There's no rush. There's only presence. And presence is the frequency of transformation. If there is anything that you gather from today, I want you to know this: you're not broken. You're not behind. You're not failing at being a human. You are in sacred transition. And transitions aren't meant to be tidy. We live in a culture obsessed with clarity and hustle and polished reinvention stories. But real transformation isn't linear. It's spiral shaped. It takes you down into the underworld and through your grief and through your anger and through your numbness before it ever lets you rise. And if you're in the thick of it right now, if your life has unraveled, if your nervous system is fried, maybe you just said, I don't even know who I am anymore, then let me tell you, you're exactly where the miracle begins. This sacred disruption is not punishment. It's permission. It's the universe gently, or maybe even violently, removing what cannot come with you into the next chapter. And it's not to hurt you. It's to free you. It's the tower falling so that your truth can rise. It's the fire roaring so that your gold can emerge. It's the silence between versions of yourself that hold the seeds of your becoming. And in case nobody's told you lately, you're allowed to take your time. You are allowed to rest. You're allowed to let go of timelines and expectations and who you thought you were supposed to be. You're not late. You're in a chrysalis. And this moment, this aching and shedding and unsteady moment, is not your end. It's your initiation. You're falling into coherence and into clarity and into the life your soul chose before it ever even knew fear. You're being rewired from the inside out. And it's not going to make sense, ... until it does. And by the time it does, you'll be somebody new, somebody truer, somebody softer, somebody stronger, someone more you than you have ever been. So let the breaking come. Let it hollow you out. Let it carve the space for your wholeness, because you're not falling apart. You're just falling into alignment. One of the most disorienting parts of a sacred disruption is the way that it hijacks your inner compass. Like, you look around and think, there is no way this is the right path. This is not what I asked for. This is not what I envisioned. I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. But here's the thing. The soul's path is rarely obvious. It's not always paved with synchronicity and angel numbers and smooth transitions. A lot of times it's marked by loss and by confusion and by the deafening silence after you've made the leap but you haven't landed yet. So, how do you trust it? How do you trust the invisible thread of alignment when all the external signs seem to say otherwise? Well, first you need to remember this. The soul doesn't move in straight lines. It moves in spirals, bringing you back to the familiar places with new eyes. So it deepens the lesson, it softens the resistance, and it refines the frequency. And sometimes what looks like a setback is actually a spiral loop pulling you into a greater embodiment. And then, second, you start to tune into resonance instead of results. Results belong to the ego, the checklists, the productivity metrics. But resonance, that's the body's language. That's the soul's GPS. It's that sense of inner yes, even when the outer world says no. It's that feeling that you get when, despite your fear, you know that you are choosing integrity over illusion. And if something resonates deeply, even if it costs you your comfort or your income or your relationships or your plan, that's often the path. Not because it's painful, but because it's honest. And then third, remember that doubt is not the enemy of the path. Doubt is proof that you're conscious, that you're thinking and questioning and engaging with the process. But trust doesn't mean never doubting. It means continuing anyway. Even when the map is missing, even when the lights go out, even when your knees are shaking and your voice is a whisper and you can't even remember why you started. You trust because your inner being hasn't abandoned you. You trust because the synchronicities that led you here weren't an accident. You trust because in your most quiet moments, when the noise fades, you still feel the pull. And that pull, that knowing, that's your true north. So if you're wondering whether you're still on the right path, ask yourself this. Are you choosing truth over safety? Are you choosing alignment over approval? Are you choosing expansion over familiarity? And if so, then you're on it. Even if it's dark, even if you can't prove it, even if no one claps, you're on the path because you are the path. And every step you take in trust is building the reality your future self is waiting to receive. There comes a moment, sometimes suddenly, sometimes gradually, when the dust of collapse begins to settle. And for the first time in what feels like forever, you actually start to feel something stir. Maybe it's a desire. Maybe it's a wild idea. Maybe it's a tiny flicker of hope that you haven't felt in months. But whatever it is you coming back online. It's your intuition returning, and not the performative kind, but the primal kind. The kind that lives in your bones. The kind that doesn't need validation to speak. The kind that just knows. And after a sacred disruption, your intuition often comes back stronger and clearer and cleaner, because that static, the noise of conditioning and people-pleasing and overthinking and self-abandonment, has been burned away. The voice that rises now is unfiltered, and it speaks in sensations and synchronicities and body language and dreams and gut pulses and skin chills. But here's the key. You actually have to listen. Even when you're scared, even when you don't feel healed enough, even when you have spent so long surviving that trusting yourself feels foreign. This is when you reclaim your intuitive power, and not through force, but through presence. So you start small. You notice what gives you energy and what drains it. You pay attention to what excites you, even if it doesn't make sense. You speak your truth in places where you used to shrink. You rest when your body asks. You say no without explanation. And you say yes without a plan. Intuition doesn't need proof, it just needs practice. And with each act of self-honoring, your intuitive channel opens wider. You stop outsourcing your decisions. You stop asking for the signs of the stuff that you already feel. You begin to trust your internal compass more than the external metrics. And then eventually, You'll look around and realize something extraordinary. You're not just surviving anymore, you're leading from within, from your soul, from a place that collapse made possible. And so if you've been through the sacred disruption, if you have been scorched by the fire and tempered by the silence, then know this: your intuition isn't something that you lost. It's something that you've been reforged in, and it's leading you somewhere holy. So trust it and follow it and become it. If you loved this episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button and leave us a glowing review. It helps more beautiful souls like you find this space. Because your words matter, your energy ripples, and every review is like a little spell of support for the Synaptic Soul mission. So until next time, stay curious, stay cosmic, and keep waking the F up.